It's definitely winter out, as you can tell by the large pile of winter coats piling up over here beside me. Where did we leave off? Let's see. Oh, last episode, I said Star Comics was the first comic book title created by new publisher Ultim in 1937, but I was wrong. Star Comics would not become an Ultim title until the summer of 1937. Before that, it was entirely created and published by the Harry Chesler Art Studio, the studio that had previously contributed to all of Comics Magazine's titles, but had never tried publishing one of their own before. And with Star Comics, they aimed to go big. I mean, literally big. It was the biggest comic book on the stands at the time, on paper slightly larger than a standard 8.5 by 11-inch sheet. Rejecting Comics Magazine's moves towards longer page counts per story, Chesler followed the famous Funnies model, an anthology of features just 1 to 4 pages in length. And that may be an odd choice because Chesler also has chosen the Comics Magazine model of complete stories in one issue, so all stories will have to be super short. And who did they get for talent? Now they follow the Comics Magazine model of poaching talent from National Allied. Their star feature, the one they give the coveted 4 pages of space to, is Dan Hastings, a Flash Gordon clone created by Ken Fitch and Clem Gretter, who you may remember created Don Drake on the Planet Sorrow and Super Police 2023 for National Allied. Dan is actually getting 6 pages dedicated to him. His 4-page story is a text story initially, and in addition to that, he also gets a 2-page story unconnected to the text story, so 6 pages in total. You may remember Ken and Clem all the way back from episode 1. This arrangement lasts for just 2 issues, and then Clem is gone, replaced by the Chesler Studio's own boy, Fred Guardineer. It's unknown if Clem wanted off the feature or if Chesler just used him for character design and then booted him out. Now, Ken stays on, continuing to write the stories, but with Guardineer's cleaner, more professional art. Chesler thinks they have a potential hit on their hands now. By the last Chesler issue, number 7, Dan Hastings is now occupying 10 pages, 6 pages of text story, and 4 pages of comics. More page count than any other comic book character is getting in a comic book, except for newcomers Bruce Nelson and Slam Bradley, but I'll be talking about them in another upcoming episode. So is Dan Hastings worth the hype? Since the odds are that you have no idea who that is, probably not. When he fights humans, they aren't Asians or human-like aliens who substitute for Asians, so that would put Dan a little ahead of early Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon in that respect. Except that instead of the planet Mongo, Dan fights aliens on the planet Mexidy. So the aliens are stand-ins for Mexicans. The 4th issue's cover contains a fight scene that, for Guardineer, has a lot of energy and drama to it, but yeah, that's all I've got. The rest of Dan Hastings is utterly forgettable. Which makes it a little weird that when Ultim offers to buy Star Comics off of them after issue 7, Chesler says, "Okay, but we're keeping Dan Hastings." This must have happened because Dan Hastings disappears from the pages of Star Comics and every other Ultim title, but will appear in other companies' titles that Chesler prepares material for later, like MLJ's Blue Ribbon Comics in late 1939, sorry. But Dan Hastings is a generic enough character that in 1938, Star Comics' own owners decide to just recreate him and task then freelancing Fred Guardineer to come back and create Don Marlowe, a Dan Hastings clone, or if you will, a clone of a clone. Now you're probably thinking, Melissa, that's all well and good, but I need you to really sell me on this Star Comics. Why should I go back and read it? There are ads for Baby Ruth candy bars? Maybe you're anti-union. That's right, Chesler not only believed racist content sold comic books, but that poking fun at people demanding a fair wage was a surefire success. So we have strips like Joe Ticket the Picket. And this isn't the only page of Joe Ticket. Joe appears in the first 4 issues of Star Comics and will keep coming back in other packages of Chesler material all the way to 1945. Would you believe it's the first appearance of Bob Phantom? Bob Phantom is one of the most obscure of superheroes, despite the fact that he's been around off and on since 1939. Archie Comics, just last year, published a one-shot that was the very first time Bob Phantom has ever headlined his own title. But before any of that, he was just a stage magician in this 1-2-page story. When Chesler was creating new material for Blue Ribbon Comics in 1939, not 93, 39, he remembered liking that name, Bob Phantom, and just reused it. Maybe you'd want to look at Star Comics for its star talent, which consisted of, well, there was Winsor McCay Jr. So not even really Winsor McCay Jr. He signs his work as Winsor McCay Jr. His name is Bob McCay or Robert McCay, and he's Winsor McCay's son because he's no dummy and he knows that people are going to pay more attention to him if they mistake him for his more famous father. Winsor McCay is, of course, the legend, the comic strip legend that created Little Nemo in Slumberland and basically created the entire field of animation. Now, Winsor McCay Jr., or Bob, has no claim to any of that, really, although his father is very generous with his own properties and allows his son to make use of the Little Nemo and Slumberland characters. So there are 2 issues of Star Comics that feature Little Nemo on the cover. There will be no Little Nemo content specifically inside, at least not that character from it. It's not Little Nemo, it's not Flip, it's not the princess. There's one character from Little Nemo in Slumberland who is a little problematic. He's a character that is made to look like he is a African native, kind of, in a very stereotypical negative way, and his name is Impy. Definitely looks very racist today. So naturally, Chesler is looking at the properties of all these Little Nemo characters, and he points to Impy and says, oh, that one. I want you to do that one. Or something like that happens, because in fact, Impy does get a regular strip for several issues of Star Comics. So there's that. There's also, let's see, what else? How about Creig Flessel? Creig Flessel was a blacksmith's son born on Long Island in 1912. He studied painting at the Grand Central Art School in Manhattan, but his first work was illustrating pulp fiction, most notably The Shadow. He then started working for National in 1936 after answering an ad in the New York Times looking for artists. After trying out for 1 issue on Don Drake on the Planet Sorrow, there's that again, subbing in for Greta, Flessel was allowed to create and both write and draw his own feature, Steve Conrad Adventure, which I've never talked about yet, and to be fair, probably doesn't deserve a lot of our time. And for a while worked on Pep Morgan, a character I have talked to you about. Normally, publishers hated it for their artists to moonlight for other companies, but Flessel was a special case. Extremely prolific. He kept his old job working on Pulp Fiction, then added comic books, then added advertising work, and then began assisting John Strebel on Dixie Dugan. And you'll remember Dixie Dugan all the way back from episode 2. And he still kept all of his deadlines. So Flessel was not stolen away from National Allied by Chesler so much as just borrowed. Creig did artwork that appeared on 5 pages of the second issue of Star Comics, but it wasn't all comic strip-like art, but more like illustrated text story. Creig may have finally overextended himself and had to pull back because he contributed to just a few issues for Chesler before National would again be the only comic book company's work that you would find him in. Other than that, there's some early Charles Biro work and Frank Frollo, both of whom I talked about last episode. But other than that, no, stay away from Star Comics like it's radioactive, and we'll be talking about more really good comic books again soon. So I will talk to you then, and maybe before even then. Bye-bye for now.